In 1957, two engineers from MIT walked into a 19th century wool mill on the Assabet River in Maynard, Massachusetts, and rented 8,680 square feet of floor space for $300 a month. The building had stitched blankets for Union soldiers during the Civil War. Now it smelled of dust and old lanolin, and the two men, Ken Olsen and Harlan Anderson, furnished their corner of it with office furniture bought on credit from a local store. They had $70,000 in startup capital, a conviction that the computer industry was building the wrong machines, and a company name chosen specifically to avoid the word computer, because their investor was afraid of it. 30 years later, the company they built in that mill employed more than 120,000 people across 80 countries, generated $14 billion in annual revenue, and stood second only to IBM in the global computer industry. Fortune magazine called Ken Olsen the most successful entrepreneur in America. By 1998, what remained of Digital Equipment Corporation was sold to Compaq for $9.6 billion, less than half its peak value. Compaq was swallowed by Hewlett-Packard 4 years later. The mill still stands in Maynard. The clock tower still keeps time. DEC's name is gone from it. How a company that beat IBM at its own game lost everything begins with a boy fixing radios in a Connecticut basement. You're watching American Electronics, where we take apart the companies that built the electronic world, down to the circuit board and the engineer who designed it. If you want the story behind the machines that made computing personal before the personal computer existed, subscribe now, because this rise is every bit as strange as the fall. Back to Maynard. Kenneth Harry Olsen was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1926, the son of a family with roots in Norway and Sweden. His father worked in machine tool design. The boy spent his childhood fixing broken radios for neighbors in the family basement, building a local reputation as the kid who made dead things work. After serving in the United States Navy from 1944 to 1946, he enrolled at MIT, where he earned a bachelor's degree in 1950 and a master's in 1952, both in electrical engineering. At MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, Olsen worked on the SAGE air defense system, a Cold War network designed to track Soviet bombers in real time. But the project that reshaped his thinking was smaller. The laboratory had a stripped-down experimental computer called the TX-0, and Olsen noticed something the people writing the budgets had missed. Students waited in line for hours to use the TX-0. They walked past a faster IBM machine in the same building without a second glance. The difference was not speed. The TX-0 let you sit at a keyboard and work with it directly. The IBM wanted you to hand over punch cards and come back tomorrow. Olsen became convinced that interactive computing was the future of the industry. His colleague Harlan Anderson shared the conviction completely. The world's computers cost millions and lived behind glass walls in climate-controlled rooms. What if you could build a machine small enough and cheap enough for a single lab, a factory floor, a hospital wing? They needed money. In the late 1950s, the American business community wanted nothing to do with computer startups. They found one man willing to bet. Georges Doriot, a French-born professor at Harvard Business School, ran American Research and Development Corporation, one of the first venture capital firms in the United States. He invested $70,000 for a 70% stake. It was Doriot who suggested the name Digital Equipment Corporation, because Fortune had recently published an article showing that almost nobody was making money selling computers. The word itself was a liability. In the summer of 1957, DEC opened for business in the old Assabet woolen mill, a complex producing wool since 1847. Olsen was 31, Anderson was 27. For 3 years, they sold electronic logic test modules, not computers. In 1960, DEC shipped the PDP-1 designed by engineer Ben Gurley. PDP stood for Programmed Data Processor because even the product name avoided the word computer. The PDP-1 sold for $120,000, a fifth of what IBM charged. About 50 were built, each with a cathode ray display and keyboard. You could sit in front of it, type commands, and watch it respond. The PDP-1's most famous moment had nothing to do with DEC's business plan. In 1962, a programmer named Steve Russell and a group of MIT hackers created Spacewar, a two-player space combat game on a PDP-1. It took them 200 hours. The game spread to nearly every PDP-1 installation in the country, and DEC began shipping it preloaded on new machines. The company that set out to build serious instruments for scientists had accidentally midwifed the first video game. Olson ran DEC with a management style no business school would have endorsed and that his engineers loved. He refused to move to a bigger house after the company made him wealthy. He drove a Ford. Inside the company, product groups competed against each other for resources, a structure that bred creativity and eventually internal warfare. Almost everyone called him Ken. The culture had edges. In 1966, co-founder Harlan Anderson was forced out after a disagreement with Olson. Anderson had been executive vice president. Olson moved on without comment. The real engine of DEC's rise was the PDP-8, launched on March 22, 1965, at $18,000. An IBM mainframe cost hundreds of thousands. The PDP-8 was the first commercially successful mini-computer. Over 50,000 were sold. Its chief designer was a young engineer named Edson DeCastro. The PDP-8S, released a year later, dropped below $10,000, the first computer to cross that threshold. These machines went into nuclear labs, newspaper composing rooms, factory floors, and classrooms. They proved a computer could belong to a department instead of a data center. Then, DeCastro proposed a 16-bit successor called the PDP-X. Ken Olson killed it. He could not see what it offered that the 12-bit machines did not. DeCastro left DEC in 1968 at 29, taking engineers with him. They founded Data General. Their first product, the 16-bit Nova, outsold the PDP-8 at a lower price. DEC sued for trade secrets. The suit went nowhere. The man who designed DEC's most important product walked out with the idea for the next one because the founder refused to listen. It was the first time the pattern appeared. It would not be the last. What saved DEC was Gordon Bell. Bell had joined in 1960 as employee number 80, recruited from MIT. He designed the first UART, a piece of hardware now inside every device with a serial port, and the architectures of the PDP-4 and PDP-6. He left for Carnegie Mellon in 1966, returned in 1972 as Vice President of Engineering, and found a company falling behind. Data General's Nova was taking share with its 16-bit design. Bell oversaw a crash program to build the PDP-11, designed primarily by Harold McFarland, who arrived from Carnegie Mellon carrying his own research, along with Bell and Roger Cady. When the team presented the design, management nearly canceled it. It shipped in 1970 at $20,000. Around 600,000 PDP-11s were sold. Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie wrote Unix on a PDP-11. Dennis Ritchie created C on a PDP-11. Every modern operating system traces a line back to the machine that management almost killed. Bell was already looking ahead. On April 1, 1975, he assembled 6 engineers on the 3rd floor of Building 12 in the Maynard Mill. Bill Strecker was named chief architect. The project, extend the PDP-11 to 32 bits. They called it VAX for Virtual Address Extension. DEC's argument had always been that smaller, cheaper, interactive machines could replace the mainframe. The PDP-8 proved it. The PDP-11 proved it again. The VAX would prove it so completely that IBM lost billions, but embedded in that argument was a logic nobody in Maynard wanted to follow to its conclusion. If smaller machines always win, what happens when something even smaller arrives? Before the mini-computer, computing meant IBM, machines the size of rooms, batch processing, punch cards. A single IBM Systems 360 cost more than a suburban house. The PDP-8 sold for 1/5 the price and fit on a workbench. Suddenly, a lab or a newsroom could own its own machine. Cold War defense spending accelerated the shift. DEC's machines were everywhere real-time data mattered. But while DEC built the mini-computer empire, the microprocessor arrived beneath it. Intel's 4004 in 1971, the Altair 8800 in 1975, the Apple II in 1977, the IBM PC in 1981. Each smaller, cheaper, closer to the user. The logic DEC had used to dethrone the mainframe was being turned against the mini-computer. In 1977, the year the VAX was announced, Ken Olsen said 7 words that would follow him to his grave. There is no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home. He later explained, and the documented record supports him, that he was referring to computers controlling household systems, not personal computers. The quote escaped its context and calcified into legend. You can read his words 2 ways. An honest history requires holding both. A man genuinely misquoted, and a founder whose instincts about the next wave were dangerously late. DEC tried the personal computer. The Rainbow 100 arrived in 1982, incompatible with the IBM PC standard. It failed. None of that mattered yet, because the VAX was about to make DEC wealthier than anyone in Maynard had imagined. The VAX 11780 was announced October 25, 1977. The first units shipped the following year, Carnegie Mellon University receiving the first machine, a 32-bit super mini computer that could compete with IBM mainframes at a fraction of the cost. Bill Strecker's architecture gave it the power. Dave Cutler's VMS operating system gave it the reliability. The numbers tell the story. Revenue climbed from roughly $700 million to more than $14 billion. Over 400,000 VAX systems were sold. In 1986, DEC's profits rose 38%, while the rest of the industry declined. More than 120,000 employees across 80 countries. Market capitalization peaked at $24 billion. DEC became the second largest employer in Massachusetts, behind only the state government. The mill complex, purchased for $2.2 million in 1974, had grown past 1 million square feet. The PDP-8 proved computing could leave the mainframe room. The PDP-11 proved it could reshape software. The VAX proved it could take on IBM and win. 3 machines, 3 arguments, 1 mill, 1 river. But inside that mill, the seed of the ending was planted. Dave Cutler, the architect of VMS, was designing a next-generation RISC processor called Prism and a new operating system called Mica. Engineers argued that Unix and the microprocessor were the future. The operations committee, loyal to the VAX and its margins, would not listen. The argument DEC had made against the mainframe was being made against DEC. The company that built its fortune on that argument chose not to believe it twice. In 1988, DEC canceled Prism. The reasoning looked rational. Defend the VAX, license MIPS processors for workstations. The existing business was profitable. The new project was expensive. Dave Cutler was furious. That summer, Nathan Myhrvold at Microsoft arranged a meeting with Bill Gates. On October 31, 1988, Cutler became a Microsoft employee. Most of his DEC West team followed, handing in resignations on a Friday and starting at Microsoft the following Monday. They spent 6 months writing a specification for a new operating system. That specification resides in the Smithsonian. The system, Windows NT, was deeply shaped by the Mica operating system Cutler had designed for the canceled Prism. DEC sued. The settlement included royalties and porting NT to DEC's Alpha processor. The damage was irreversible. The personal computer doubled in power on a schedule that would not wait. Sun Microsystems carved into DEC's workstation market with Unix. The VAX 9000, DEC's direct challenge to IBM mainframes, became a costly failure. DEC posted its first full-year loss in 1991. In 1992, Ken Olsen was forced to resign. He was 66. He did not come back. Robert Palmer took over. His job was to manage the dismantling. Between 1990 and 1998, DEC shed roughly 70,000 employees. The downsizing cost $4.8 billion. The company Ken Olsen had run like a family became one measured in the thousands of jobs eliminated per quarter. There was one late flash of brilliance. In 1995, researchers at DEC's Palo Alto lab, led by computer scientist Louis Monnier, built a search engine to demonstrate the alpha processor's speed. They called it Alta Vista. On December 15th, it received 300,000 queries on its first day. By 1997, 80 million hits per day. Alta Vista was the first full-text searchable index of the World Wide Web, the modern search engine, invented inside a dying company, running on its own hardware. DEC had no strategy for it. The Alpha chip, born from the canceled Prism, was the fastest processor in the world at points during the 90s. But DEC could not afford to be its own semiconductor company against Intel's scale. In May 1997, DEC sued Intel for patent infringement. The settlement stripped DEC of its fabrication facilities. The company was selling its own organs. On January 26, 1998, Compaq announced the acquisition for $9.6 billion. DEC had 53,500 employees, down from over 120,000. A company valued at $24 billion sold for less than half. Compaq could not digest what it bought. In 2002, Hewlett-Packard acquired Compaq for $25 billion. DEC's inventions were buried 3 layers deep. The name disappeared. Ken Olsen died on February 6, 2011 at 84, in hospice care in Indianapolis. His family said nothing about the cause. Gordon Bell died May 17, 2024 at 89. Edson DeCastro died September 6, 2024 at 85. The founders and builders are gone. The machines are not. PDP-11s still run in industrial and military systems decades after the last one was manufactured. Collectors pay thousands for working PDP-8s. The SIMH emulator project keeps DEC operating systems alive on modern hardware, and enthusiasts worldwide write new software for platforms declared dead before they were born. OpenVMS, the direct descendant of Cutler's VMS, is still commercially maintained on modern processors. The operating system DEC built for the VAX in the 70s is running somewhere right now. The line of descent goes further. Cutler carried VMS to Microsoft. Windows NT became every version of Windows that followed. He went on to build the operating system underlying Azure and the hypervisor inside the Xbox One. The principles designed in Maynard now run a significant portion of the world's cloud infrastructure. AltaVista proved the entire web could be searched in seconds. In 1997, Larry Page and Sergey Brin pitched their PageRank system to DEC. DEC did not act. The future knocked twice, and nobody answered. DEC invented the mini-computer. DEC invented the modern search engine. DEC's engineers invented the operating system architecture that runs the world's most widely used software. DEC's designers built the chip that was, for a time, the fastest on Earth. And DEC could not stop defending the product it already had long enough to become the company its own engineers were trying to build. The wool mill on the Assabet River in Maynard still stands. The clock tower, built in 1892 by Lorenzo Maynard, still keeps time, wound by hand once a week, 90 turns of the crank up 120 steps. The building is called Mill and Main now. Small businesses rent the floors where DEC engineers once designed the machines that challenged IBM for supremacy. If you drive past on a weekday afternoon, nothing about the building tells you what happened there. Nothing except the scale of it and the silence. What DEC left behind cannot be measured only in silicon and software. It is measured in a way of thinking about machines and the people who use them. Before DEC, computing was a priesthood. You submitted your problem to the machine's keepers, and the keepers returned your answer when they were ready. Olson's conviction that the person doing the work should touch the machine was not a product strategy. It was a philosophy of human dignity applied to engineering. Every interactive system built since, every cursor blinking on every screen, rests on that conviction, whether the people building those systems know the name of the man who held it or not. The company also left behind a diaspora. When DEC shed 70,000 jobs across a decade, those engineers did not disappear. They scattered along Route 128 and into Silicon Valley, carrying habits of mind that no competitor could replicate from a manual. DEC alumni seeded companies across the industry. Bob Supnick, who managed the VAX 8800 program, later built the SIMH emulator that preserves DEC's machines in software. Engineers from DEC's networking groups carried expertise into Cisco, Juniper, and a generation of internet infrastructure startups. DEC's contributions to networking alone would fill a separate episode. The company helped develop Ethernet at its Western Research Laboratory in Palo Alto, working alongside Intel and Xerox on the standard that wired the modern office. VAX clusters, introduced in 1984, allowed multiple machines to share storage and fail over automatically, an architecture that anticipated cloud computing by 2 decades. When engineers today talk about high availability, they are describing problems DEC solved during the Reagan administration. Then there was the culture, the thing hardest to quantify and most often mourned. Former employees describe it in terms that sound almost utopian by modern standards. Engineers had extraordinary autonomy. If you had an idea and could persuade a few colleagues, you built a prototype without filing a proposal. Decisions were made by people who understood the engineering because the person at the very top understood the engineering. That culture produced machines that worked because the people designing them were allowed to care more about the machine than the quarterly report. It also produced chaos. The product matrix that fueled creativity in the 60s became a political battlefield by the 80s. Groups building competing products refused to cooperate or share components. Customers received contradictory recommendations from sales teams inside the same company. Olson believed internal competition sharpened people. It did, until the competition turned inward so completely that the company could no longer agree on what it was building or who it was building it for. The irony runs deep enough to cut. DEC's founding insight was that the computing industry's giants were too invested in their existing machines to see what was coming next. IBM could not imagine a useful computer that cost $18,000 instead of $2 million. DEC could not imagine a useful computer that cost $2,000 instead of $18,000. The pattern is not unique to technology, but no industry repeats it more reliably. The company that sees around one corner almost never sees around two. What remains, finally, is the work, not the stock price, not the layoff announcements, not the acquisition rumors that filled the trade press through the long decline. The work. Code still running on machines its authors never imagined. Architectures still shaping systems in hospitals, banks, and power grids. A way of building that treated the user as a participant, not a supplicant. That was DEC's argument, made first in a wool mill on a river in Massachusetts, and nearly 5 decades after the company lost its name, the argument is still winning. The company that proved small machines could kill big ones could not accept that even smaller machines could kill theirs. If you worked at DEC, programmed a PDP, administered a VAX, or searched the web on Alta Vista before Google existed, drop a comment below. Tell us the machine, the year, and whether it still runs. The engineers who built these systems and the people who used them know more about what was lost than the people who sold it. Subscribe to join the archive, because the history of American technology is full of companies that changed the world and then disappeared, and we are not finished telling these stories. We have the story of another American tech empire coming next, and you will not want to hear how it ends.